So let's talk about, so a quick review. What we've seen in lecture 1, what human action, that human action is innate, that human action is purposeful, that only human beings act, that human action takes place in time, in conditions of uncertainty, etc. In lecture number 2, we said that human action takes place in the state of nature, right? And we discussed the state of nature, how Hobbes characterizes it as being chaotic, difficult, right? So that's where human action is taking place. And I mentioned earlier that Etienne de la Boétie, right, in his book, The Politics of Obedience, identifies few criteria. Why are we obedient to the state? Why are we submitting ourselves, our freedoms, our personal to the state in order when we realize that we're not benefiting, right? So these actions are criminal, and this is out of fear that people enslave themselves and let themselves be governed, leading to political authority. And when I say political authority, I mean, monarchism, democracy, that's what political authority is. So why are we allowing ourselves to be enslaved to the state, right? Because it's out of fear, a perceived fear of the nature of state. So, a quick review of what we've seen so far. So, we started that with human action. That was lecture number 1, human beings act in the state of nature. Action is taking the state of nature. But what guides our action? Okay, and that's what I would like to talk about, is that our action is guided by our human nature. Our action is guided by our human nature. So let's talk about human nature. Human beings, we have 2 characteristics. One of them is the essentialist characteristics, and the second one is nomological characteristics, or what we call evolutionary characteristics. So what makes us unique? What differentiates us from the animal and the plant kingdom? And what do we have, right, what we have in common with the animal and the plant kingdom? The essentialist characteristics dominate all the species, whether it's the plant, all kingdoms, okay? They're not susceptible to external elements. They are innate, okay? So, for example, all species, right, aging is an essentialist characteristic of human beings. We all age. And we're going to find out how this nomological and essentialist characteristics guide our human action. Human action is not taking place in a vacuum, okay? So it's internal, it's biological, it's at the gene level. We all age, all species age, okay? Animals, plants, human beings, we all age, okay? Reproduction, we all reproduce. Animals reproduce, trees reproduce, human beings reproduce. Essentialist, it's across time and space. We always produce, okay? We consume energies of life. Heat, food, water, temperature, right? We consume energies. Circadian rhythm. Animals have different circadian rhythms. Human beings, we have sleep, day, night. Plants turn in a certain direction in the afternoon. We all have rhythms, internal rhythms. Hibernation is a type of a rhythm. We are all mortal. We all die. Okay? So how does mortality guide our human action? Okay? And we all do what? Struggle for homeostatic equilibrium or homeostatic equilibrium, right? Internally. That's what brings us equilibrium in our genetic makeup. So these are examples of essentialist characteristics. We also have what we call nomological characteristics. What are nomological characteristics? Nomological characteristics are evolutionary characteristics. They're biological. They are influenced by the external environment. And these evolutionary characteristics include our cognitive capacity, right? We human beings speciated 50,000 years ago cognitively, physically, biologically, we speciated about 200,000 years ago. Artistic expression is nomological, is evolutionary. Bipedalism, right? Bipedalism is evolutionary. complex expression, verbal, deductive, logical analysis, verbal communication, artistic communication, the epicantic fold of the eye, the inner eyelid, right? The fold of the inner upper eyelid to protect a person from cold winds, right? These are all nomological characteristics. So as economists, in order, if we want to study human action, then we really have to understand human nature. We have to take human nature into consideration, both its essentialist and biological or nomological characteristics, so we can analyze why, how, right, human beings act in a certain way. So essentialist and nomological features govern human action, and they govern the science of economics. So, human survival necessitates acquiring and maintaining a homeostatic equilibrium. I mentioned it's the chemical energy, we need food, we need heat energies, we need certain body temperature, we need light for vitamin D's, for synthesis, bone health, immune function. So human action, therefore, right, must align with its human nature. Every action must align with human nature. So the metaphysical world doesn't align with human nature, because it's not coming from human. It's just coming from human mind, but right, we can create, we can invent certain things, but it's not aligned with our human biological nature. Whether human being is competitive, whether we compete, whether we cooperate, whether we're selfish or whether we're self-interested, whether we are injurious or harmonious to our neighbors and our business partners, all of these are incidental to the human being. My goal is not to be your friend, my goal is not to be your enemy, my goal is survival. So everything is motivated by our survivalist instinct, which leads to perhaps harmonious or injurious or relationship or actions in the marketplace. So our goal as human beings is guided by our biological sustenance, and everything else is incidental. So survival is innate, it's organic to the human beings. Obviously it is genetically determined, so our actions must be in accordance with our innate purpose. However, as we realized, we already discussed, our best way of survive, to thrive in a market, in an economy, in the state of nature, is to do what? Cooperate, to voluntarily exchange, to specialize, right? To exchange the goods and the services. And that's the beauty, that's the miraculous aspect of a market economy, that your own self-interest, motivated by your own survival instinct, right, leads to cooperation, harmony, interdependence in the marketplace. So your quest for survival also leads to the survival of other members in the market economy. Okay, that's the beauty, that's the science of economics. So, understanding human nature is therefore very important for understanding human action and the science of economics. Unfortunately, most textbooks don't talk about human nature. There's no comprehension of the human nature. There's no true, and we cannot have a true economic theory. We cannot talk about the price mechanism. We cannot talk about demand, the law of demand, the law of supply, the law of diminishing marginal utilities, the law of returns to scale without an understanding of our nature, of our human nature, without having a knowledge of human nature. So, as we discussed earlier, and I would like to, a few questions were raised about the self-interest. Within the self-interest, there is altruistic behavior. Self-interest may lead me to donate all my time to charity. It could lead me, to do, so, few questions were raised by Soledad about, how self-interest, may create a parasitic relationship, etc. So, but nevertheless, it is a predominant quality in human beings. Now, there is obviously, some pushback from some students, or some other philosophers. For example, Elliot Sober and David Sloan, in their book Onto Others, The Evolution and Psychology of Unselfishness Behavior, they propose that there is an inherent altruism at the kin level. They said sometimes people sacrifice themselves for their village, for their neighborhood, for their family. I mean, I have children, I might sacrifice my life. And they said, where is the self-interest coming from? right? When you're sacrificing your life for someone else. That's the argument. So the question is, how do we reconcile, right, self-interest with, right, altruism at the kin level? And it's not difficult. It's simple. It's straightforward. Well, our self-interest comes from where? It comes from our selfish genes. So the genes, so our self-interest at the kin level exists because of what? Overlapping of our genes. I'm more likely to sacrifice my time, energy, to risk my personhood for a family member than for my neighbor, than for a stranger, 100 miles away, or another person in another planet or another part of the world, right? So my kin sacrifice, right, diminishes as you walk away from the capacity or the potential of genetic overlap. I'm more likely to sacrifice my time, energy for a human being than an animal. I would more likely to spend, sacrifice my time, energy for an animal over a plant, right? So the further you go away from this genetic overlap, the less likely that you spend, you sacrifice your time space. For your children, well, I mean, that's that's the genes. The genes are self-interested. They want to move on from, the one human to another person. Why do you think procreation is a pleasurable activity? I mean, the genes are so smart. They made sure that they're passed on to the next generation over and over and over. So they made sure that we get pleasure out of procreation. So we don't forget about it, right? It just happens because we're just there. So it's a passive. So I mean, we're just vehicles for the selfish genes that they move on, from one host to another host, etc., down the line. So that's how we can reconcile self-interest and altruism at the kin level of the gene overlap, and that's what this slide is talking about. So we human beings are not altruistic for the sake of altruism, but rather for ourselves and for our genes, okay, for our genes. And this is a brief introduction to human nature. I'm going to stop here.